Blood of the Summoned by Philip D. Adams. Prologue.
I am dead. I have always been dead. Since the beginning of all things, I have been consigned to the black depths, a lifeless, formless, tortured wretch. My name is Drekavek. Before the beginning, I lived in the presence of the Ancient of Days, lacking nothing, ever rejoicing. I was among the lesser serving in the legion of the Keeper of the Light. Grand and glorious and wise was the Keeper, a creature exalted above all others, beloved of the light he bore, and wholly deserving of my devotion. When the rebellion came, I was forced to choose whether to worship the Keeper or the light itself. I cursed the light and hailed the Keeper. Since then I have known only darkness, pain, and fear, torment so unspeakable that I writhe and I curse and I wail inconsolably. This was the price of my choice, an eternity of suffering with no beginning and no end. Such is the nature of eternity, and so it was, my permanent state, my eternal fate. Then something changed. Like a lifted veil, the darkness relented, and I saw an escape. A path out of the black, leading to a dwelling that had once been occupied but was now vacated. Its denizen was a living soul that had been summoned to dwell in the presence of the light, as I once had. Curse him! I knew that to enter such a place was a violation, a befouling of something holy, and I would not have hesitated to commit such a desecration. But entering this new place was not of my doing. I simply found myself here, and that was to my liking. At once I knew that this new dwelling was not real, not eternal. It had form and substance, which meant that it would undoubtedly pass away in time. But neither was it dark and desolate, and for that I felt fortunate. I felt stirrings within, rhythmic internal machinations that gave motion to the form. It was all quite new to me, and yet curiously familiar. I sensed memories awakening within me that were not my own, memories of other lives and other souls, of beings large and small, of sounds and scents and images of a life that I had never lived, things not discovered anew, but somehow merely recognized. With these memories came feelings of all kinds, not just the endless pain and humiliation I had always known. Instead, with pain came relief, with fear, hope, with loss, redemption, with hunger, satisfaction. Each led to the other and back again, weaving together events and lives and propelling each one forward, always forward toward the next. Whatever this place was that I had entered, I was now part of it, and it was part of me, just as if it had always been so. I felt the air on my skin. I heard rustlings all around me. I sensed the warm day passing into a cool night. I stirred from my prone position and slowly rolled over and sat up. I knew that even in this place I still could not truly live, but I could mimic life for a time, and that was enough. What would come after I could not guess. Perhaps back to the darkness, perhaps another place. I only knew that I wanted to remain here for as long as I could. I opened my eyes. Immediately I recognized my surroundings, a one-room wooden cottage that was the home of Wulfric Stefanson of Gidley, that is to say, my home. In the twilight I could see that the cottage had been ransacked. Parts of it had been set aflame and were now smouldering. The thatch roof that Wulfric, that I, had built hadn't burned all the way and was still partly intact. The rug on which I sat, now soaked in blood, was the one that I had bought from a Saxon merchant from Mercia some 10 years ago. I remember he said it was from Rome and wanted 20 silvers for it. I said it was more likely from Hanbury and paid him 12. I looked down at myself. I had on a frayed wool tunic that was dusty and rank. My feet were bare. The skin on my arms and legs was dirty but unblemished. Next to me lay a woman who looked like she had been beaten to death. Her cold, naked body lay twisted in a rather unnatural position. It was my wife, Sunniva. From behind me I heard slurping sounds along with muted guttural groans. I looked around and saw a large bearded man sitting on a bench, the only piece of furniture left unturned. His back was propped against the wall next to the window. His green wool tunic was bunched above his waist, and on his lap was a naked girl whom he gripped at the waist and bounced lazily. I recognized the girl as my daughter, Adri. She looked barely alive. Her pale, limp body was leaning back against the man's chest, her head tossed back onto his shoulder. Her long reddish-brown hair was tangled and matted with sweat. Her tear-stained eyes were glazed and hollow, and her mouth drooped open. A trail of blood ran down her body from where the man's hairy face was buried in her neck, his open mouth clamped tight on her soft flesh, sucking boorishly. Though Wulfric would have raged at such a violation of his daughter, the sight left me utterly unmoved. After a moment the man stopped his slurping and looked up at me.
"Ah, Drekavek, or should I say Wulfric,"
he said, wiping his mouth and chin on his sleeve.
"A week at last, yes. I had a feeling this chap would not stay still for long."
I could tell that he was a being like myself. How, I could not say, but there was no mistaking it. He knew my true name.
"Who are you?" I asked. "They call me Brune these days, though I've been called worse," he said, punctuating it with a rattling belch.
I sat and watched as he resumed raping my daughter with renewed urgency. With each thrust her slack body gave way, and her head bobbed and bounced as languidly as did her swollen, sweaty breasts. "Did you do this?" I asked, looking around the room. My question was purely out of curiosity.
"What, your house? Nah, I found a place like this. Northmen raided the village today. Looks like you didn't put up much of a fight, I must say. Then again, I'm sure there were a lot of them, and by the look of your lady there, I'd say they all left smiling."
Brune tensed for a moment, let out a series of loud, satisfied grunts, then relaxed against the wall. "How long have you been here?" I asked.
"Got here about an hour ago. By the time I arrived, the Northmen had already gone. I found this one hiding in the sheep's pen. Yours, I presume? Very pretty."
By now the girl had slumped forward. Brune slapped her bottom.
"She managed to evade the others, but I sniffed her out right away. She's still got a few mouthfuls left in her if you're hungry."
"No, I meant, how long have you—"
"I know what you meant, Drekavek."
He pushed Adri onto the floor with a casual shove, then stood up and lowered his tunic.
"I've walked this world for many lifetimes of men, my friend. I've travelled leagues beyond counting, and I've been called by many names."
"But how—"
"How did I get here? I was summoned, same as you," Brune explained. "Same as the rest of us."
"There are others?"
"Oh, yes," he said. "Quite a few, actually. All of us plucked out of the black, just like you. Given leave, you might say."
"By?"
"Well, now, that's an interesting question, ain't it?" Brune said as he rummaged around the place, moving the remains of Wulfric's few worldly possessions with his toe. "By these mortals, mostly. Bleeding idiots. Always dabbling in things they don't understand. They fear death, you see, along with most everything else they can't explain, but death most of all. So they make a big show out of worshipping all manner of things. The sun, the moon, the sea, the trees, gods of one thing and another that they've dreamed up. These days they've even taken to worshipping the creature, if you can believe that. The Christ, they call him now. It makes them feel safer. Immortal even."
Brune interrupted his foraging and looked me straight in the eye.
"But truth be told, they all serve the same master we serve. Most of them, anyway. They wouldn't be able to summon us otherwise. You know of whom I speak."
"The Keeper?" I said.
"Ha! Keeper no longer," said Brune as he continued searching the debris. "You mean the Desolate One. Desolate only because he was robbed of what was rightfully his. But yes, he is the lord of this world. He rules the hearts of these mortals, the same precious children the Ancient One loves so much. Funny, ain't it?"
Brune stopped to savour the irony, then continued.
"Anyway, from time to time these silly bastards will attempt to call into the darkness and seek us, thinking we're going to protect them from this or that. Spirits they call us, or demons if you please. They gather together in the night, all dressed and painted like fools. They dance and sing and fuck each other. Then they slaughter one of their own and invite one of us to take its place. I joke not. Those of us who have been around long enough have seen this over and over. It nearly always comes to nothing, of course, but every now and then they stumble across one of us and we hear them, and a way is opened out of the black."
"So these Northmen did this? They summoned me here?" I asked, still a bit confused.
"Well, no," said Brune. "I said that's how I got here. It's been a good while since that's been done, though. You were brought here a different way, the way it's usually done these days. You see, when we feed off mortals, we can also make them drink our blood, and that sometimes invokes the same powers that summoned us."
"Sometimes?"
"Well, you never know, do you? It's a bit like fucking, you might say," he explained. "That's the way these mortals breed, of course, but it doesn't work every time. Well, neither does making them drink our blood, you see. Although in your case, it seems to have done the trick."
"So you brought me here," I guessed.
Brune shook his head and laughed. "As it happens, no. This poor sod didn't drink from me. There was another."
He picked up his leather belt from the floor beside the bench and fastened it around his waist. "Another?" I repeated. "Who?"
"No idea," he said. "Must have left with the raiders. Not surprised, though. This bleak little corner of the world seems to be where all the action is lately."
He found a small cloth sack and a large, finely crafted axe that had been on the floor by his belt. Slinging the sack over his shoulder, he picked up the axe and looked over the wreckage one last time.
"Filthy bastards didn't leave much, did they? Well, I'm off. Have a good time of it, Drekavek. I mean, Wulfric. Perhaps I'll see you again. Oh, and you'll want to stay out of the sun. It can be bloody uncomfortable."
With a hearty laugh, Brune sauntered off into the summer night. I gave not another thought to what Brune told me. My own hunger was the loudest voice I heard at that moment. I grabbed the shivering girl, who by now was far too spent to put up even the least resistance, and instinctively began to feed from the same wound on her neck that Brune had opened. The thick hot liquid flowed down my gullet and warmed me inside. She had more than a few mouthfuls left in her, as it turned out. My senses, at first rather dull, now sharpened to a razor's edge, and I felt life surging within me for the first time since the beginning of time. It wasn't mine, of course, but it was life just the same. I could now see everything clearly, even in the darkening night. I felt strong, exhilarated. My head swam with such thoughts of power, lust, and conquest that I hardly knew where to begin. The answer quickly presented itself as I felt my cock stiffen with another sort of hunger. I flopped Adrienne onto her back and took her savagely. By the time I finished, she was dead. As I sat back, licking my lips, I distinctly sensed a feeling of blessed relief turning to supreme joy. Strangely, that feeling wasn't mine either. Rather, it seemed to waft in the air above the girl, like the smoke from a snuffed candle. It lingered for a moment, as if to taunt me, then, just as quickly, it dissipated. I lost no time pondering this strange sensation. Instead, I got up off the floor and walked about, awash in such indescribable bliss that it seemed to lift me into the air. I knew not where I was, nor where I would go, but I was free of the torment at last, if only for a while, and all I would need or desire was here for the taking. As my mind darted about like a bee in clover, another memory began taking shape, reminding me of something missing in all of this. Or could it be someone? Perhaps a mortal? A lad? My son? Ah, yes, my firstborn, Edwin. I wondered what had become of him. Perhaps I would encounter him somewhere, perhaps not. In any case, there was much to discover, and nothing left here of any worth. I abandoned the bloody, smoking ruin that had been my home, and strolled out into the moonlight.